A few weeks ago, Kevin Penkin, my favorite composer, celebrated his 31st birthday. And this year, Yoko Kanno, the legend of anime soundtracks, just turned 60. So for this occasion, given their similarities, I wanted to answer this question: is Kevin Penkin the next Yoko Kanno? And to this question, some will wonder, who is Yoko Kanno? I don't think everyone knows her. And to that, my answer is... Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam. The list goes on. Even the music that we hear from the beginning was composed by her, which is more a meme song than anything else. Yoko Kanno has written over 50 scores for TV, films, video games, and anime, recognized as one of the most influential contemporary Japanese composers, alongside Joe Hisaishi, Nobuo Uematsu, Kajiura Yuki, Kenji Kawai, and many more. Then comes the question, who is Kevin Penkin? Well... yes, Kevin Penkin has written over 20 scores for TV, video games, and anime in just 10 years of career. Quite impressive. He is part of the new generation of contemporary anime composers, alongside Hiroyuki Sawano, Evan Cole, Kensuke Ushio, Yugo Kanno, and many more. Now back to the question, is Kevin Penkin the next Yoko Kanno? Well, in my humble opinion, yes. Hey, wait! But Kevin remains Penkin and Kanno remains Yoko. They have different styles and backgrounds. In this video, I would like to compare my favorite composer to one of his greatest musical inspiration. What are their differences and similarities, whether in their career and music? Disclaimer. It's a short video that doesn't go into detail about all the complexity and sensitivity of the works covered. Take this as an invitation to see these works and hear these composers for yourself. Okay, now we're good. Hi, I'm Aneko, and welcome to... First, let's start with the differences. Number 1. Different countries. Yeah, this one was kinda obvious, but it's more interesting than you might think. Kanno is Japanese, and Kevin is an Australian born in England.
Yeah, I checked with a mate, and he seemed to say that was okay.
Checked with a what?
With a friend.
In addition to this, I found this clip about the origin of his name.
Is my surname Russian? It is Lithuanian. Basically, they were Lithuanian Jews. They went to South Africa, and then my dad is South African, my mum's English, Irish, and I was born in England and raised in Australia. So yeah.
There is a lot to unpack here. But above all, Kevin managed to work in the anime industry as a composer despite not being Japanese. In the same case, we can also mention Evan Cole, an American working in Japan who composed for Violet Evergarden, and Mason Lieberman, an American composing for anime, video games, and helping Kevin Penkin in several projects. I have a lot of respect for them. Working in anime being non-Japanese is like playing in Dark Souls difficulty. It's not impossible, but it takes motivation. Learning another culture, speaking fluent Japanese, and be able to travel or live in Japan. The case of Kevin Penkin is quite specific. Australia is not far from Japan, same for the time zone. But it all started in the United States of America. All this way to meet Nobuo Uematsu and his manager in a Final Fantasy concert. By his experience, his proximity, and above all, his motivation, Kevin was able to collaborate with one of the greatest composers of video game music. First with Juseingi Engetsu Songokuden, a Final Fantasy VII acoustic arrangement, and finally, Nor 9, who was his gateway to anime, because it was produced by Kinema Citrus, the studio that will make Made in Abyss, The Rising of the Shield Hero, and Star Wars Visions Episode 4. Kevin Penkin could have been satisfied to have composed for anime, but he also composed memorable music and brought an authentic touch by mixing contemporary and Japanese music. He has come a long way, but he went through with his dream to compose for anime and video games despite not being Japanese. I feel like I'm forgetting someone. Oh, unfortunately, I don't have much information. We can say that Yoko Kanno is a mysterious person with fewer public appearances and information about her life. Just for her birth, I have several dates. Was she born in 1963 or 1967? In March or May? On the 16th or the 18th? Anyways, Kanno was born at the perfect time to witness the golden age of anime and be part of it. Which brings us to the next point. Number 2. Different eras. I would like to remind you that there is 29 years of difference between Kevin and Kanno, almost twice the age difference. Yoko Kanno started in the 19s until the 2010s, and Kevin Penkin started in the 2010s until today. We previously saw how Kevin got into the anime industry. Now let's see the case of Kanno. The 80s marked the start of the golden age of anime, and one of the greatest things that happened at that time was undoubtedly the creation of Studio Ghibli, founded by the directors Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. Not only did they bring us some classic movies, but also timeless music to accompany them, composed by Joe Hisaishi. At that time, Kanno was working as a composer for the video game company Koei, and unrelated to this business, she had the opportunity to arrange the ending music of the movie Porco Rosso, interpreted by Tokiko Kato, the voice of Madame Gina, and orchestrated by Joe Hisaishi. I guess it's a small word after all, at least a small country. This was her gateway to anime. But her first work as a composer was for the space opera Macross Plus, co-directed by Shinichiro Watanabe, and this marks the beginning of several collaborations between Kanno and Watanabe. Together they will make Cowboy Bebop, Kids on the Slope, and Terror in Resonance. In addition to the animes they worked on separately, both really influenced the anime industry and the use of music. One of the greatest qualities of Watanabe is his way of highlighting the music during the scenes to add impact, with the influences of American music combined with the music of Kanno, and you have songs that not only marked anime lovers, but also musicians, like Mason Lieberman, who produced a special performance of Cowboy Bebop's The Real Folk Blues to raise money for charity during the COVID crisis, featuring several artists who contributed to the anime industry, even Yoko Kanno herself. And of course, Kevin Penkin was heavily influenced by Terror in Resonance, which he considers the best OST of the 2010s. Yoko Kanno was truly a pioneer of anime soundtracks, and with more than 20 years of career, she has explored more musical styles than any other composer. But today, her name may have been forgotten. because she belongs to an older era. She is still active as a composer, but her last significant work in anime was 9 years ago. Yes, she worked for the Cowboy Bebop Netflix adaptation, but this is more nostalgia than novelty. What was improvisation for her musicians yesterday have become scores to be played today. Even though she quit making music for anime, I'm thankful there are people like Yoko Kanno who experiment, improvise, and take risks to push the medium of music even further and inspire other musicians like Kevin Penkin, who is at the start of his career. At just 31 years old, he still has time to establish himself as a reference in the future. Anime connoisseurs will remember Kanno for Cowboy Bebop, but her magnum opus might just be Terra in Resonance. Not only it is her last work, but it also marks the end and the beginning of an era. So, we talked about countries, then eras. What about backgrounds? Number 3. Different worlds. I'm not saying that because Kanno has a talent from another planet. What I mean is that Kevin and Kanno have their own artistic world, which is the result of several factors: culture, experience, but also background. The two had a similar yet different experience. They discovered a culture other than their own, which changed their lives. Kanno is strongly associated with jazz, thanks to Cowboy Bebop, which mixes many genres of African American music, and Kids on the Slope, which mainly focuses on jazz. Surprisingly, Kanno didn't grow up with jazz or blues, but with classical music. Her childhood is also marked by her Catholic kindergarten, playing piano and organ. Everything changed when a friend who played drums in a school band introduced her to new music and new rhythms. I thought my friend was a genius. I had heard drums on the radio before, but it was like I had never really noticed them. Then I see drums performed live and was able to experience a bit for the first time. I started to take heavy interest in music that wasn't classical and joined the band Elective. I wanted to say, we couldn't have chosen better than Yoko Kanno to make the soundtrack. The fact that Kanno's story has similarities to that of Kids on the Slope must have inspired her to write the music and even perform it. Looking back on her past, we can guess why we find in Kanno's music a mix of classical, pop, and even religious. Of course, that's not the full picture. Anyways, what about Kevin Penkin? He is known for his anime soundtracks and his contemporary music style that he gave to Made in Abyss, but his first interest was video game music. It all began when he played for the first time Metroid Prime and listened to this specific song. The genesis for my passion of game music came from the theme of the Phendrana Drifts in Metroid Prime. The combination of electronic synths and acoustic instruments was absolute bliss for me. At a very young age, Kevin became interested in Japanese video games and anime. This picture shows some of the most important soundtracks that shaped Kevin's childhood, including one soundtrack of Nobuo Uematsu, 3 soundtracks of Joe Hisashi, and 4 soundtracks of Yoko Kanno. There is also a lesser-known side of Kevin Penkin, his culture of EDM and specifically drum and bass, in this clip from the Trash Taste podcast.
Was that your decision to be like, I'm going to put a bunch of fucking dubstep
No,
in
it's
there
because
right now?
I used to go to a lot of fucking raves. Yeah, so Perth has like a massive drum and bass scene.
We're really getting the backstory.
Yeah. No, but Pendulum from there, for example.
Oh, yeah, true.
There's
Of course,
like,
of course.
It has a great scene, and that culture of dance music, and especially
Like hardcore music.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
either liquid drum and bass or dark drum and bass fucking just kept with me.
Looking back on his past, we can guess why we find in Kevin's music a mix of contemporary, Japanese, and even EDM. Again, that's not the full picture. If we stopped here, it wouldn't make sense to compare them. But there is a work that became for the two composers a common inspiration and brought their two worlds a little closer. And this work is Ghost in the Shell, a monument to the cyberpunk genre that influenced works like Matrix, Deus Ex, and Cyberpunk 2077. I don't remember the story exactly because it was my older siblings who watched Ghost in the Shell on TV and I was too young at the time. I thank them for making me discover this anime because even if I don't remember everything, I still remember the music. Ah yes, finally! Music analysis time! It took me 50 minutes to properly introduce Kevin Penkin and Yoko Kanno. Now the serious stuff begins. Ghost in the Shell is a manga by Masamune Shiro, pre-published in 1999. Its very first adaptation is an animated movie produced by Mamoru Oshii in 1995. He also made a sequel called Innocence in 2004. The music for both movies was composed by Kenji Kawai, who adopts a mixture of synths, Japanese percussions and choirs, like the opening songs of the two films, to create a discrepancy between the traditional and the futuristic. Initially, Kawai wanted to use Bulgarian folk singers, but instead, he opted for Japanese folk singers who sing Bulgarian harmonics. Keep that in mind for later. Yoko Kanno was inspired by the music of Kenji Kawai to stay consistent with the sound identity of Ghost in the Shell for the anime standalone complex she was in charge of. For example, the song Torukia uses several folk choirs, but instead of singing Japanese or Bulgarian, they sing a made-up language wrote by Gabriela Robin. Yoko Kanno has used so many musical genres in standalone complex that I couldn't name them all. A good example to show this versatility is the song Homestay. It starts with a techno intro, continue with some funky guitars, and concludes with a big guitar solo. But if I could describe this soundtrack in one word, it would be retro-futuristic. Trying to imagine how the music from the 2030s might sound using recording techniques from the 2000s. On the side of Kevin Penkin, he drew inspiration from both Kanno and Kawai to compose the soundtrack of Tower of God. Kanno because he considers standalone complex and solid-state society possibly the best anime OSTs of all time. Certainly a major influence of his music, and Kawai for the use of Bulgarian choirs in the Ghost in the Shell movie. While listening to this music, I thought he recorded a real choir, but it turns out to be a realistic VST. Technology is scary sometimes. Add to that a good dubstep wobble, a cinematic drum, and you have the song A Regular God, which sets the tone of this soundtrack. Although their inspiration are similar, Kevin and Kanno took a different approach. Except for one song from both soundtracks, which contains drum and bass. In this tweet about an anime he was working on, presumably Tower of God, he talks about a track that sounds like a cross between Blade Runner and Ghost in the Shell, which is also a good way to sum up the mixture of inspirations in the Tower of God soundtrack. My bet for the track in question would be Facing the Enemy, a drum and bass song produced with his longtime friend Feeding Ear, with whom he attended the same university and the same raves. I would like to compare the song Facing the Enemy with a song from the second OST of Ghost in the Shell, Cyberbird, a drum and bass song produced in 2004 by Yoko Kanno, with again lyrics by Gabriela Robin. Now the fun begins. I would like to do an experiment that I have already done once on my channel. If we put Cyberbird in the left ear, Facing the Enemy in the right ear, synchronize the BPM, et voila! This could be a legit song. Same key, similar drum beat, and a soft vocal lead. But that doesn't mean the two are the same. Even if by ear it sounds like the same, the chord progressions are different. While Cyberbird opts for a simple loop in 4 bars, Facing the Enemy makes a slightly more complex loop in 8 bars, although it sounds more like an inversion of A minor and C major than a new chord progression. Cyberbird uses a made-up language like all the songs of Gabriela Robin, while Facing the Enemy uses vocalizations that sounds like English And finally, Cyberbird drums is close to jungle music, distinguished by a more complex rhythm than drum and bass, and uses acoustic drums, perhaps an unconscious callback to this drum kit played by Kano's friends that changed her perspective of music and rhythm. Facing the enemy drums is close to liquid drum and bass that Kevin mentioned earlier for its more ambient and melodic side, and uses an electronic drum. Okay, comparison time over. Whether it is a tribute to Ghost in the Shell or the result of his experience with EDM, we feel an inspiration, but above all, an appropriation. It's not just about copy-pasting, but about learning from the best, whether by transmission of knowledge or just listening to what you love and make music your way. The first time Kevin Penkin listened to Yoko Kanno's music, it's as if their two different worlds have collided. The first time I listened to Kevin Penkin's music, it was in 2020, 3 years ago, during the start of the pandemic. It wasn't the easiest time. In this year was released the movie Made in Abyss, Dawn of the Deep Soul. And when I discovered the first season of Made in Abyss, I just fell in love with this anime. Was it due to this charming Ghibli-like universe, these endearing characters, this captivating and dramatic story? Or was it because of this music that immediately resonated with me? I think it's a mix of all that. One day, I played the music of Made in Abyss to my big brother, who introduced me to Ghost in the Shell, and he said to me, "We feel the inspiration of Yoko Kanno." And this without knowing that Kevin was a fan of Kanno's work, and without being a musician. It was just because he was a fan of Yoko Kanno's music. He told me he was a bit sad that Kanno no longer makes music today. Even if in my video we saw that she was still active, she doesn't have the same impact she once had. Maybe after decades of making music, she was able to achieve everything she wanted, that she could live peacefully to make way for the next generation. Still, Yoko Kanno remains a legend, and her music will endure over time, whether it is her own music or the inspiration it will give to composers like Kevin Penkin. A bit like a passing of the torch. Everything should separate them, their country, their era, their background. After talking about the differences, I would like to discuss the similarities. Number 1, versatility. I hesitated with other attributes. Flexibility, authenticity, creativity, only words ending with TY. Then I agreed with the attribute versatility, a quality that every artist must have to adapt to this world, whether in the way of working or in the art itself. Concerning composers, a good first topic is musical arrangement. Arrangement is changing the style, the melody, or the harmony of an existing song. Here, Kevin Penkin produced an acoustic arrangement for the prelude of Final Fantasy VII. Originally, it was played on chiptune, then played on harp and synth in the remake. Finally, in this version, Kevin takes liberties by changing the orchestration and harmonization while keeping this melodic line that goes up and down. Also, do you remember that Yoko Kanno started in anime music by arranging a song for Ghibli? Although it is not the primary function of a composer, it is important to know how to arrange music, using a raw material that wasn't composed by you and highlighting it either by emphasizing its qualities or by making your own interpretation. It can also be a good way to start a career, like Kanno did. That's what I would call a proof of flexibility, accepting all good opportunities to reach your goal, even your childhood dreams. In addition, both arranged and composed openings and endings, something that is only possible if you have experience in musical arrangement. The second topic I wanted to address is budget, a parameter that can greatly affect the quality of music.
So obviously, like when you start a project, you give it a budget.
Right.
And the budget, sometimes you can like kind of stretch it a little bit, and you can do some little bit of black magic just to get some deal.
An example of black magic as a composer is VST, which stands for Virtual Studio Technology. a tool that I use a lot in music. Because renting a studio and recording real instruments can be expensive, why not use virtual instruments that produce sound faithfully, like the Bulgarian choir in Tower of God? Well, virtual instruments cannot replace a real instrument, like artificial intelligence cannot replace human. Right? But above all, Kevin and Kano value authenticity. If today a musician has access to a lot of computer tools to make music, a traditional composer will prioritize acoustic instruments. In Kano's case, the way of recording Cowboy Bebop was unorthodox. One or few takes for recording, no visual of the anime, and a limited time for a huge soundtrack. At that time, the VST had just been created, so everything depended on the talent of Kano and her musicians. And maybe that's why the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack has this aspect of spontaneity, of freedom, and authenticity. Kevin also had to face difficulties to preserve the authenticity of his music. I had the opportunity to attend one of his masterclass 2 years ago, and I was able to ask him this question: what are the consequences of a budget cut for a soundtrack, fewer songs or fewer instruments? And his answer was, we will not be able to record live on certain instruments, we have to make sacrifices for budget and time. The example he gave was the song Unannonted Eternat Live, a beautiful Swedish song played in a key moment of the rising of the Shield hero. Only 3 voices were used, no drone, no VST, to create an ambient. Kevin plays on the resonance and the reverb of the voices. Without making a comparison, it reminds me a bit of the song The Promised Land in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, for its intimate side, pure and refined. It's not because we have less means that we can't produce something polished. When you are limited, you have to boost your creativity, like indie games that have a small budget but creative ideas. Okay, it was quite a technical part, but I thought it was important. We don't realize all the effort, the budget and the logistics it takes to produce soundtracks. Knowing how to make music is not enough. You also have to manage human contact, the pressure when things don't go as planned, and always strive for excellence, even if it's not perfect. Kevin and Kano are more than qualified to be composers and be considered the most versatile in the industry. After a very rational part, let's move on to a more abstract one. Number 2. Transcendence. Of all the art that exists, no other has influenced me as much as music. And of all the musicians I've listened to, no others have marked me as much as Kevin Penkin and Yoko Kanno. In this part, I would like to show that music can transcend culture, language, and time. The 3 differences that separate Kevin and Kano. Let's start with culture. We saw previously that Kano had a Catholic background. Although Kano grew up in Christianity, she is no longer a believer today. Her religion was due to her parents who educated her in Catholicism and classical music. 2 closely related elements, because the greatest composers of classical music were Christians, and their music was meant to be influenced by God himself, like a transcendence between heaven and earth. And these influences continued in Kano's music, classical compositions, use of choir and organ in music, and biblical references. Whether intentional or subconscious, these elements come from her childhood. But it's by discovering other cultures, African American music, Icelandic post-rock, electronic music, and by mixing sacred and secular music, that she created her own music and crossed the boundaries of culture. Now about Kevin Penkin, we know he's a descendant of Lithuanian Jews. I have no information if he has a religion, but he seems to be someone spiritual.
Especially the bass, like it's a fucking physical reaction.
Yeah.
Biblical, man, it's so good.
Yeah. That's such a good adjective.
Yeah.
Biblical. I'm going to use that more, more often.
It's resonating in your chest. It's really good.
It's so good that Jesus had to get involved.
It is a little spiritual. It is a little spiritual.
Anyways, let's continue with something more concrete. Language. The beauty of music is that you don't need to understand the language to feel the emotions of the singer. And of all the composers, no other than Yoko Kanno has used so many different languages, even some French. J'aime le gruyère. Kevin Penkin also used different languages. Although his music is rather instrumental, he may have wanted to do more lyrical songs, thanks to Yoko Kanno, after listening to the soundtracks of Wolf's Rain and Terra in Resonance, because we find in these soundtracks the singers Raj Ramaya in English and Arnór Dan in Icelandic, two singers that we will find later in the soundtracks of Made in Abyss and Tower of God, two significant soundtracks for Kevin Penkin's career. Of course, I don't forget one of his biggest bangers that we owe to a particular singer, Takeshi Saito, singing in Hanezebe Karadina and other songs. The peculiarity of these songs is that they are sung neither in Japanese nor in English, but in a made-up language. Kevin was inspired by German and Icelandic to represent the language of the abyss, but he was also inspired by the runes found in the manga. For example, we can write Hanezebe Karadina in these glyphs, and even Japanese names found in the credits. About made-up language, we can also mention Kajiura Yuki, who invented the Kajiura-go, and of course, Yoko Kanno, under the name of Gabriela Rabin, that we have seen many times, who invented the Gablish. A notable example is the song Moon, that Kevin considered one of the best pieces of music ever composed for anime. Originally, it is Kanno herself who sings, but during live, it is sung by her friend Origa, singer who performed the openings of Ghost in the Shell, including the immortal Inner Universe we hear in the background in a special version. But let's get back to our topic. Kevin Penkin says he uses gibberish in his music, but I would like to call it the Penkish, like the Gablish. Made-up languages is a way to convey emotion rather than information, and a good way to represent transcendence. Sure, I could have put some songs to illustrate the languages used, but I have exceeded the quota of copyrighted music, and I'm starting to run out of time. Inner Universe is one of my favorite openings, but I haven't listened to it for years. The last time was when I learned with sadness that Origa passed away in 2015 due to a cancer. Then, by doing research for my video, I found this live from the online Tanabata festival in 2020. Listening to this more intimate version, seeing Origa's hologram next to Kanno, remembering the lyrics of the song, I was on the verge of tears. If I could, I would shut my mouth right now, just to enjoy the music. But I would like to conclude this part by saying, this is the true beauty of music. It transcends cultures, the languages, but also time. For a brief moment, Origa came back to life, in our ears, in our memories, by her longtime friend, Yoko Kanno. Let's finish with the last similarity, number 3, harmony. By harmony, I mean harmonization between audio and visual, something I noticed when analyzing the first soundtrack of Made in Abyss. At the end of the video, I concluded that one of the best weapons used in Made in Abyss was nostalgia, by creating a theme that has a sound close to works like Nintendo or Ghibli, and that it was not necessarily intentional, but the result of Kevin's childhood. As we have seen in this video, the influence of Christianity in Kanno's music. However, in addition to creating a memorable theme, he will reuse it in other songs in order to evoke past memories and forge a bond. Should we call that nostalgiaception? No, seriously, it's interesting. The Made in Abyss theme, apart from its repeats, is only reused twice in the songs Prushka sequence and Old Stories. But the sequences that use these songs really hit right in the kokoro. The song that interests us here is Old Stories, the first music that introduces Season 2 of Made in Abyss. The first time I listened to it, I had a flashback of when he was streaming on Twitch in 2020.
It's me!
Because he had composed a draft of this song live. I think it was not necessarily intended for Made in Abyss, he was just composing for fun, trying to experiment with new material, like his reinterpretation of Puparia, a short film by Shingo Tamagawa, which will later become another track for Made in Abyss. In 2020, Kevin Penkin became not only my favorite composer, but also my comfort streamer. I kinda miss his streams, but I'm glad I was there at that time, because it made my lockdown more bearable. Anyways, the draft of Old Stories we hear right now was really close to a song composed by Yoko Kanno, one of her finest works to date, Vaughn, from Terror in Resonance, her latest work in anime, the song that I teased throughout the video. The director Shinichiro Watanabe stated that the inspiration for the show and its soundtracks came from Siguros. I really like Siguros. From the first episode of the series, we see the name Vaughn appear, painted on the ground. Even if we discover at the end that there is a precise meaning to this word in the series, it is basically the title of Siguros' first album. It's not really a spoiler, but Vaughn in Icelandic means hope. Siguros is also a big influence for Kevin Penkin, as you can see in this clip.
Ooh, favorite Siguros album? Absolutely, it's going to be Tak. The first Siguros album that I heard, and It Forever is going to be a huge influence on me. So I love it.
No one asked, but Tak in Icelandic means thank. How to learn Icelandic with Siguros. But back on topic, I'm gonna be honest. Terror in Resonance is not a masterpiece. I had trouble hanging on to the story and the characters. But after seeing the last episode and listening to the soundtracks to make this video, it has become my favorite work of Watanabe. And I urge you to watch this anime, which is the last collaboration between Watanabe and Kanno. A short music analysis. It was originally planned that I end with a comparison between Vaughn and Old Stories, as I did for Cyberbird and Facing the Enemy. Sure, there would be things to say, like the rhythm of the piano, which has slight similarities, although the playing between the melody and the bass is different. The key, which was the same in the draft, has been changed, and the chord progression is richer in Old Stories than in Vaughn. But I would like to end with something else. A hidden gem from the last soundtrack of Made in Abyss that technically doesn't sound like Vaughn, but impressed me as much as that, because it is one of the greatest songs that Kevin Penkin has composed. And this song, coincidentally, is called Vow. When listening to this song, there are two different reactions. People who don't know,
Oh, that's a nice song.
and people who know. Whoever it is, you know by listening that this song is special. For me, this is the definition of grandiose in its purest form. And I'm glad to hear in this song the voice of Takeshi Saito, with whom he has collaborated for years, not only for Made in Abyss, but also in other projects. I feel a bit of the same synergy that Kanno and Origa had, an extraordinary composer and an extraordinary singer. The use of a made-up language here really leaves room for emotion, a cathartic song that fits perfectly with the tragedy of Made in Abyss. But it's all thanks to the work of the sound identity, the power of remembering a particular scene thanks to music. This is the harmony between audio and visual. We tend to forget that Kevin and Kanno are composers, not songwriters. Their goal is not to make the summer hit, even if sometimes they make bangers, but to create the sound that best suits the visual. It's a team effort with directors and producers. Thanks to the sound director who had the idea of placing Hanezeve Karadina in the sunrise scene, the pilot episode of Made in Abyss was a success. Thanks to Shinichiro Watanabe with his ideas of using jazz or Icelandic post-rock, Cowboy Bebop and Terror in Resonance have their sound identity. And to finish, thanks to Yoko Kanno and many more, I found my favorite composer, Kevin Penkin. And for that, I will always be grateful. I think it's important to end this video by saying, I don't think Kevin Penkin wants to become Yoko Kanno's spiritual heir. The fact that Kevin Penkin could be the next Yoko Kanno is my humble opinion. If you ask me to be objective, I would say he has the talent, but not the reputation. Yet, he still have time ahead. Maybe in a few years, Made in Abyss will become a classic that people will discover. Maybe he will compose the new soundtrack that will make him known to the mainstream. Or maybe he doesn't need all that, and he's fine with what he has already accomplished in 10 years of career. Yes, he grew up with Kanno's music, but also with Ghibli, Final Fantasy, Metroid, and more. Even today, he continues to be inspired by the directors, the musicians, and the singers he meets. I'm a little scared by making this video to jinx Kevin's career, to compare him with Kanno and add extra pressure on him. But he has already proven that he has entered the big leagues. Whether it's Kevin or Kanno, they have been alongside legends and made a name for themselves. I guess life is a cycle. Music was not created by Mozart, Hans Zimmer, or Yoko Kanno, but everyone contributes. Thousands of people for thousands of generations who transmitted their art and their knowledge for the music to continue. Anyways, this video is long enough. 42 minutes may not be enough to sum up why I love Kevin Penkin and Yoko Kanno. I don't know if I will ever have the chance to meet them. I don't know if I will have the chance to make a living from music. But one thing is certain. The music lives in me. Before leaving, one last lesson. Bless in Icelandic also means goodbye. Thanks for watching and see ya!